who authored the Alberta Agenda, this later come to be known as the Firewall Letter. He was in 2004 Alberta general election elected to the newly created seat of Foothills Rocky View, and has been an MLA for Progressive Conservatives since that time. His ministerial portfolio includes being Minister of Sustainable Resource and Development, and he was also has been the Minister of Finance recently. He did run in the 2006 PC leadership election, and so without further ado, please welcome Mr. Ted Morton.
Thank you, John. Thank all of you for coming today. Is the mic working? You hear me? A little closer. Okay. How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Very pleased to be here today. In some ways, I've spent almost more time in the federal Conservative Party than I have provincially, so it's nice to be with you. I'll cut right to the chase. I think the PC Party here in Alberta is at a crossroads. We know that because of some of the mistakes that Premier Stelmach made, that we've alienated a large base of traditional Conservative Party supporters, and particularly a lot of people who've been active in the in Federal Reform Alliance Conservative politics. The most obvious mistake was the royalty review, but there have been others as well. And so I think the party is at a crossroads. Either we choose a leader and choose policies that win back the disillusioned Conservatives, or we're going to go through this next decade with two Conservative parties in Alberta, trench warfare, fighting it out, splitting votes, electing more Liberals in Calgary, Liberals and Indies in Edmonton. I don't think that's the best way. Certainly not the best way for the party to spend the next decade, and also would be a huge lost opportunity for the province of Alberta. We need a strong, just like we do federally, a strong, united Conservative Party in this province to take advantage of the opportunities that the next decade offers. I think I'm the candidate to do that, both based on my track record and people know me, and also I'm focusing on 5 core policies that I think are the key, that are shared by almost all Conservatives of every stripe, and they'll be very familiar to this crowd. Bring back the Alberta Advantage, work with, not against governments, to keep our oil and gas, agriculture, forestry, keep our different sectors competitive, to keep the economy growing. So no more royalty attacks on the oil and gas industry, no Bill 50 that's going to triple electrical transmission costs. So 1, Alberta Advantage. 2, get back to fiscal responsibility. 5 deficits in a row is enough. Any more deficits mean real debt. Real debt, we know, first thing, what happens when governments get in debt. We know that. We saw it here in the 90s when Ralph had to dig us out of that $20 billion debt hole. What gets cut? Education, healthcare, and social services. It's happening in the U.S. right now, happening in Europe right now. My commitment is to sound fiscal administration that will not let government debt erode the essential services that Albertans need and want and deserve. But we all know, and the federal party knows this better than anybody, that sound financial administration is the key to good government. Not just on the financial side, but on the services side as well. So Alberta Advantage, fiscal responsibility, democratic reform. Again, the new Conservative Party, the roots of the new Conservative Party, of course, come out of the Reform Party, and it captures that spirit of reform, that spirit of democratic populism that's so powerful in Alberta politics. The PC Party cannot afford to be a party of the status quo, a party of complacency after 40 years. If we become that, both the Wild Rose and the Liberals will make big gains off of that. So on democratic reform, first and foremost, of course, I'm committed to getting Senate reform back at the front of our agenda. All of you know I worked hard in the Reform Party days for Senate reform. We were the leader. Of course, at that point, we had a prime minister who didn't believe in elected senators. Now we have a prime minister that wants to reform the Senate. For goodness sakes, Alberta should be taking the lead again on Senate reform, and I will, as your premier. But democratic reform doesn't stop just at the external issue of Senate reform. We need best practices here at home. So I've laid out a half a dozen or so reforms, fixed election dates. Federal party's already done that. Term limits for premiers. A stronger Auditor General. Again, all of you know how important Sheila Fraser was to getting to the bottom of the Liberal sponsorship scandals in Quebec. And that 1 year I spent working in Ottawa for the Alliance Party, or the Reform Alliance Conservative Party, it became very clear to me that a strong Auditor General is actually the most effective check on the government of the day in terms of rooting out inefficiency and waste. So I'm prepared to strengthen the Auditor General here, and I will not let politicians set their own salaries anymore. I'll roll back the big pay increase that we gave ourselves in 2008 and turn that over to a separate commission and let them set it. So democratic reform, I think at the heart of the Conservative movement here in Alberta, will be part of any government that I lead. So we got fiscal responsibility, Alberta Advantage, fiscal responsibility, democratic reform, strong leadership by the Premier. We know that historically it's crucial for the Premier to be the champion for Alberta interests. The Liberals know they can form governments without any MPs from the West or from Alberta, and the Conservatives, you guys, I know you love Alberta, but when push comes to shove in Ottawa, and I understand this, when push comes to shove, if it's Quebec, Ontario versus Alberta, a lot of times Quebec, Ontario gets the nod. Why? Because we're going to vote Conservative anyhow. We're sure as heck not going to vote for those other parties here in Alberta. So it falls on the shoulders of the Premier of this province to be that strong, effective voice. Peter Lougheed was that way, Ernest Manning was that way, and Ralphie, in his own unique way, did that as well. Ed Stelmach has not done that. We need a strong voice for Alberta in the coming decade. So finally then, my fifth and final commitment is putting conservation back into the meaning of being conservative. Why are we all fiscal conservatives? Why do we all believe in fiscal responsibility and not leaving unpaid bills or debts to the next generation? It's wrong. Each generation should pay its own way. It's the same on the environment, particularly in a province like Alberta that's so blessed with natural resources and natural beauty. I think it's just as wrong to leave an environmental mess to the next generation as it would be to leave an economic mess. So that's the final one. Now, I think those 5 core principles, combined with my leadership, I have the best prospect of pulling small C Conservatives back into the PC party and avoiding the vote splitting, the trench warfare that's going to happen if we have 2 Conservative parties going forward. Let me just finish, take 3 minutes, and we'll get to the Q&A on federal-provincial relations. Alberta's position in Canada right now has changed in a way that creates a huge opportunity. Part of it's an economic change, and part of it's the political change. The political change is thanks to you people, and thanks to the federal Conservative Party. We now have a majority, a solid national majority across Canada for Stephen Harper. So we don't have to worry about snap elections anymore. The Prime Minister can do what he wants to do for the next 4 years in terms of what Canada needs. The second thing that's changed is economics. Since the recession, Alberta has become the most important province in Canada in terms of economic growth and job creation. The supply chain for goods and services out of Alberta, mostly the oil sands, but not just the oil sands, now stretches into Ontario and Eastern Canada, Atlantic Canada. And so what that means is for the rest of Canada to prosper, Alberta has to prosper. To keep people working in Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada, Alberta has to keep growing. And what this means policy-wise in Ottawa is that policies that are good for Alberta are good for the rest of Canada. And the key thing is that Prime Minister, one, understands the economics of what I just said, and plus, it coincides with what I'm sure is his number one political priority, and certainly I assume it's your priority and all of ours, that Stephen cement in his new majority government again in 2015. And the key to that is what? Ontario and the West. That's what was so historic about what happened on May 2nd. It's a majority government that's based on a new coalition in Canadian politics, Ontario and the West. Now, he knows he's going to keep the West. So the key to 2015 for Stephen Harper and your party, my party, is getting those 60-plus seats again in Ontario. How do we do that? He has to keep Ontario working. He can't let Ontario slip into the Obama malaise of Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, those auto-packed, all of those U.S. states, along with Southern Ontario, that depend on the auto industry. That industry is going nowhere fast in the next couple years. So to keep Ontario working is key to Stephen Harper's future, and the way to keep Ontario working is to keep the oil sands growing. And so that becomes key to this alliance between Alberta and Ottawa. Now, all of you know that I have a long-standing relationship with Stephen Harper. Sometimes when I'm feeling mischievous, I sometimes blame Stephen for dragging me out of the ivory tower and into the mud pit of politics. He was the graduate student that walked into my office in the late 80s and introduced himself and said he was working with a man named Preston Manning to form a new party, and Mr. Manning was interested in some of the things I'd written on Meech Lake and Charlottetown, and would I be interested in meeting Preston Manning? I said, well, of course I'd be interested. And, well, one thing led to another, and when Stephen first ran for MP, it was in Calgary West, which most of you know that's where I've lived for 30 years, and I helped him win that first nomination in the first election in '93, and I've had a working relationship and a personal relationship with Stephen. We did the Alberta Agenda together in 2000, and again, without denigrating my other candidates, with one possible exception, I would suggest that of the candidates, I am the one best positioned to seize this opportunity for cooperation between Alberta and Ottawa in the next five or 6 years. Now, the one exception I'd say would be Gary Marr. Gary, for reasons I don't quite understand, is clearly associating his campaign with well-known liberals. Darrell Friedhandler, most of you know Darrell. I like Darrell, but he's the major liberal organizer in Calgary for the Federal Liberal Party. In Edmonton, he has a fellow named Jonathan Dye. Again, a good guy, but a big liberal candidate against us, I think, twice now. Federally. And then why he would spend time with Danny Williams. I mean, all you know the track record of Danny Williams and Stephen Harper and the Federal Conservatives. Danny Williams was the ABC guy and back in anyone but conservatives. Danny Williams said the worst thing that could happen to Canadian politics, in Canadian political history, would be for Stephen Harper to get a majority government. Well, I happen to think it's the best thing that's happened in Canadian political history in my lifetime. And it will not augur well. It will not be good for either Alberta or the Federal Conservatives or Canada to have a premier who has that kind of entourage around him. The window of opportunity is there. I think I'm the person that could seize it, and I'm asking Albertans, and I'm asking you here this morning to give me that opportunity to be the Premier of Alberta, to work with Stephen Harper and the Federal Conservatives, and seize the opportunity that's there. If we get things right in the next 7 or 8 years, it sets a foundation to really change how Canadian politics works. We won't need the Alberta Agenda anymore. We won't need the firewall, because we'll be in a position where our political influence is equal to our economic contribution. That's what I want for Alberta. If you give me the chance, I'll work hard to get it. Thank you.